parents chose my sister's housewarming over my wedding for a very long time. I have always known that my parents loved my older sister, Vicky, more than me. She was the planned child, while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. They probably didn't even want me but decided to keep the pregnancy anyway. My mother's parents had passed away before I was even born, but my dad's parents were very much alive, and they took on a significant role in my upbringing. Grandma and Grandpa were the constants in my life, providing the love and support that I often felt was lacking from my own parents. I remember so many instances when my parents would leave me behind with my grandparents and only take my sister on trips. When I was young, I didn't mind because it was fun living with my grandparents, but as I started to grow up, around 6 or 7 years old, I realized just how unfair this was. But my problem wasn't just with my parents, it was also with my sister, Vicky. While I harbored no ill will toward her, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted addition to the family. She knew this and made me feel like a stranger every day in my own home. She would always compete with me for everything, whether it was grades, attention from our parents, or even the smallest accomplishments. It felt like a constant battle for validation, and I was always on the losing end because my parents preferred her. As a result, I often felt inferior, and we never quite saw eye to eye. Our relationship seemed more like a perpetual contest, with her consistently coming out on top. On one occasion, Vicky wanted to be friends with a group of girls but was too shy to approach them because she was seen as nerdy. One of the girls and I had art classes together, so she introduced me to the rest of the group, and we all started hanging out. Vicky became incredibly jealous of this and had our parents talk to me about including her in the group. I tried to resist, but my mother called me selfish, and my dad said I should look after her since she was my sister. Begrudgingly, I agreed and introduced her to the group. However, Vicky didn't have many friends, and her overenthusiastic behavior often came across as intrusive. Despite her efforts, she struggled to find her place in the group, and the awkward tension was always present. For example, one of the girls had a crush on a guy, and Vicky took it upon herself to approach him and tell him about the crush. The guy, who wasn't interested, laughed and told everyone about it, embarrassing the girl in the process. After that, the group firmly told me they didn't want Vicky around anymore, and I agreed. Vicky didn't take this well. She threw a tantrum and told our parents that since the girls didn't want to include her, I shouldn't hang out with them either. She expected me to stand up for her, but I refused. I told her it was her own fault they didn't want to be friends with her. But as always, my parents supported Vicky. They lectured me about how she had no ill intentions and said I should either convince the girls to forgive her or stop being friends with them entirely. I refused to cut off my friends and told my parents it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky. My parents were furious and gave me the silent treatment for weeks. I'm glad I stood my ground, though. The girls from that group are still my best friends to this day. They're like sisters to me. I've laughed with them, cried with them, and shared some of the most meaningful moments of my life. But at the time, it was hard to stand firm. There were moments when I doubted myself, wondering if I had made the right choice in prioritizing my happiness over my parents' wishes. That wasn't the only reason Vicky grew to resent me. There was also an incident involving a boy she had a crush on. I had no idea she liked him. He and I were friends, and we would sit together in class. One day, he asked me to junior prom, but I declined politely because I already had someone else I was interested in. When Vicky found out, she was furious. She accused me of flirting with him and told our parents I always took things she wanted. She called me awful names, and even said she wished I wasn't her sister. My mother sided with her, telling me that I had broken girl code and should have respected Vicky's feelings. I tried explaining that I wasn't even interested in the guy, but Vicky refused to let it go. Looking back, I think Vicky knew the guy would have rejected her anyway, and she just wanted to take her frustration out on me. My parents, as usual, took her side. Once, my dad took me out for ice cream, which was a rare occurrence. I was excited, thinking he wanted to spend some quality time with me. But instead, he started asking me invasive questions, if my boyfriend and I were being careful, if he came from a good family, and if we ever did drugs. I was shocked by his questions and asked what he was getting at. That's when he revealed that Vicky had been telling my parents for months that I was drinking and doing drugs with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone to prove that Vicky was making everything up. Later, when he confronted her about the lies, she tried to justify her actions by saying that no one our age just hangs out with a guy, and that I was hiding things from everyone. I was furious. I yelled at her for creating unnecessary drama and told her it wasn't my fault she couldn't find someone to date, but she needed to stay out of my business. Vicky didn't like that and, out of nowhere, punched me. She had never been physically violent before, so it completely caught me off guard. My nose started bleeding, and I fell to the ground, clutching my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the emergency room, and all the while, they were pleading with me not to file a police report against Vicky. They kept saying how it would ruin her life. As I sat in the backseat, holding my bleeding face, Vicky didn't care at all. She didn't even apologize. Later, when the nurse asked about the incident, I told her the truth, and she called Child Protective Services, CPS. My parents were furious with me for involving CPS, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were just an accident, a one-time thing that didn't warrant such serious intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky wasn't a danger to me and that it was completely out of character for her. In the end, Vicky wasn't punished, but CPS warned my parents that they would keep an eye on us in case anything else happened. Vicky was really shaken up, as were my parents. Later, they told me they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mother cried, saying that I was tearing the family apart by involving outsiders. My father's disappointment was clear. He couldn't understand why I had escalated the situation. I told them, firmly, that I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. Even though I felt guilty for involving the authorities, I felt safer for the first time. My parents had a separate conversation with Vicky, and after that day, she completely stopped talking to me. I actually preferred that to her always hovering around me or inserting herself into my life. When my grandparents found out about the incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them for the rest of high school. They informed my parents, who didn't protest much, so I left to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' house, I felt safe and loved there. The rest of my high school days went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. During that time, my parents never visited me or called. I knew they were happy with Vicky, their favorite daughter, so I didn't try to contact them, though it hurt knowing how easily they had discarded me. When I graduated high school, my parents showed up, but only to cheer for Vicky. They didn't even congratulate or approach me. It felt like I was a stranger to them. My grandparents were there, though, and they scolded my parents for their blatant favoritism. I don't know what my grandfather said to them, but afterward, my dad awkwardly congratulated me. Not long after, I found out I had been accepted into a good college with a full scholarship. I was ecstatic because I was dreading the idea of asking my parents for financial help. I told my grandparents, and they took me out to a nice restaurant to celebrate. My grandmother posted pictures of me on Facebook, along with a heartfelt caption about how proud she was. Soon, our relatives found out and began congratulating me. I guess some of them reached out to my parents because the next day, my mother called. Instead of being happy for me, she told me Vicky had locked herself in her room, crying because she hadn't been accepted into any colleges yet. She accused me of intentionally making Vicky feel bad by flaunting my success to our relatives. My mother said Vicky was depressed after the CPS incident, and that I had pushed her into bad grades. I was utterly heartbroken that my own mother could blame me for such a thing. That was the last time I spoke to her for a long time. My grandparents helped me move into my college dorm, and I started my new life with a sense of independence and determination. I had broken up with my high school boyfriend since his college was far away, so I entered this new chapter of my life single and ready to embrace my future. The breakup had been difficult, but I was excited to meet new people in college. This is where I met Rob. He and I were both freshmen, and we often spent our days in the library. Rob was unlike anyone I had ever met before. His quiet demeanor and studious nature mirrored my own, and we quickly bonded over our shared love for academics. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship blossomed into something deeper that went beyond friendship. Being an extrovert, I was upfront about my feelings, and to my surprise, Rob felt the same way. We started dating, and now, 8 years later, we're still going strong. My grandparents adore Rob, and I've met his parents, who treat me like their own daughter. Rob's mother even told me that she had always wanted a daughter, and she was happy that Rob found someone like me. For the first time, I felt surrounded by family who liked and accepted me, without any resentment. Over the years, I've shared my childhood experiences with Rob, and he's always listened with empathy. Throughout our relationship, my parents barely contacted me, only an occasional birthday text, if they remembered. But recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed during a sunrise hike to one of our favorite spots, and it was a dreamy, heartfelt proposal. He was so nervous, and I had no doubt in my mind when I said yes. I posted pictures of our engagement on Instagram and told my grandparents, who were overjoyed. The news must have spread because, out of the blue, my parents called to congratulate me. The conversation seemed casual at first. They asked about my life, my job, and my apartment. Then, my dad suddenly asked if he could walk me down the aisle. I was taken aback because moments earlier, he didn't even know where I worked. I told him I hadn't thought about it yet, and he responded that it would be embarrassing if he didn't walk me down the aisle. People would talk, and it would look bad for us. I scoffed, telling them I wasn't even sure if they were invited to the wedding, considering how little contact we had. This infuriated them. My mom started lecturing me about family, tradition, and how they would always be my parents, no matter what. She said I should let bygones be bygones. Part of me was tempted to accept my dad's offer because I did want to mend our relationship. But another part of me hesitated, afraid of opening myself up to disappointment again. Since I was about to start a new chapter in my life, I told my dad he could walk me down the aisle. He seemed overjoyed. As I began planning the wedding, I reached out to my high school girlfriends, with whom I had kept in touch despite the distance. I told them I wanted the gang back together and asked them to be my bridesmaids. There were happy tears, congratulations, and they all accepted without hesitation. We decided to celebrate my bachelorette party in Vegas, while Rob had his bachelor party with his friends. We posted lots of pictures, and it was a blast. When I returned home, my parents called, upset that I hadn't invited Vicky to the bachelorette party. I told them there was no way I was including her. I didn't want Vicky in my life, let alone at my bachelorette party. My parents were shocked and asked me to clarify, so I explained that Vicky's history of deceit and betrayal had left me deeply hurt. I couldn't imagine inviting her to such an intimate event, knowing her presence would cast a shadow over it. I also mentioned that Vicky wasn't invited to the wedding for the same reasons. My parents lost it. They accused me of having no right to exclude my sister from my wedding and said it was my duty, as her sister, to include her. They claimed Vicky had been looking forward to reconnecting with me after hearing about my engagement. I was confused, asking why Vicky would think that since we hadn't spoken in years. My parents dismissed my concerns, saying this wasn't how sisters behaved. I told them I understood their perspective, but they needed to understand that my relationship with Vicky was complicated. She had never apologized for her actions, and I didn't feel comfortable inviting her. My parents ignored my explanation. My mom kept insisting that it was best for the family to invite Vicky, and my dad said our relatives would talk about why my sister wasn't at the wedding, which would reflect poorly on me. I refused to back down. I told them I didn't care if people talked behind my back. I wanted my wedding to be filled with people I trusted. My mom then asked if my fiancé would be okay with this and suggested that my in-laws would judge me for being so cruel to exclude my sister. I laughed and told them Rob and his family knew all about my family dynamics, and none of them cared if Vicky was there or not. Despite their pleas for family unity and forgiveness, I held firm. We agreed to disagree, and my parents ended the conversation by saying they needed time to think it over. I told my grandparents about the situation, feeling a little guilty for standing up to my parents. My grandparents fully supported me, reminding me that I shouldn't invite anyone I didn't want at my wedding. Since then, I've felt better about my decision and have been busy with wedding preparations. Last week, my dad called to tell me they had thought it over and decided they wouldn't be attending the wedding. Before I could react, he told me that this also meant he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. I asked him why, and he said Vicky was moving into a new place soon, one they had helped her find, and that she was hosting a housewarming party on the same day as my wedding. So, they'd be attending her party instead.